They say true power doesn't always wear a sign around its neck. Sometimes it stands quietly in the corner, unnoticed until it's too late for those who made the mistake of underestimating it. This is a story about one such day where underestimation led to a lesson learned the hard way. On what seemed like an ordinary afternoon at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, a black woman walked into Terminal 3. She pulled a modest carry-on suitcase behind her and navigated the crowded terminal with ease and quiet confidence. There was no entourage, no grand display of status, no indicators that she was anyone of importance. Little did the airline staff know that behind her reserved demeanor and warm smiles lay credentials that could send shockwaves through their entire operation. She was Maya Reynolds, a sitting United States Senator. And before the day was done, two careless employees would learn that appearances can be dangerously deceptive. A quiet arrival. Senator Maya Reynolds stood just inside the main entrance of Terminal 3 at O'Hare, pausing for a moment to orient herself. Her gray slacks and matching blazer were crisp but understated. A simple black leather tote bag rested against her hip, and her short natural curls framed a face that was calm but alert. The only piece of jewelry she wore was a slim gold bracelet, a gift from her late mother. She'd always preferred to travel light, a habit ingrained in her by her upbringing on the south side of Chicago. Maya had come a long way from those early years. She was now in her second term representing the state of Illinois in the United States Senate, but despite her national profile, she valued anonymity when she could find it. Without cameras flashing or staff swarming around her, she was often just another passenger in an airport. That's how she liked it. It kept her connected to the people she served. Today's itinerary was simple on paper: an afternoon flight to Washington, D.C., to attend emergency hearings on proposed economic reforms. But Maya had no idea that her day was about to spiral into a confrontation that would test her patience and her principles. The first encounter. The check-in area for American Airlines was busy, but manageable. Maya made her way to a self-service kiosk, punching in her confirmation code with practiced efficiency. A ping from her phone signaled a reminder from her chief of staff, Lauren, about the tightly packed schedule awaiting her upon arrival in D.C. Sighing, Maya pocketed the phone and grabbed her printed boarding pass. At the baggage drop, she approached a counter manned by two airline employees. One, whose name tag read Bryce, barely acknowledged her. The other, Heather, didn't look up from her phone. Both appeared to be in their 20s, wearing matching Navy uniforms with American Airlines badges pinned neatly to their lapels. "Good afternoon," Maya said with a polite nod as she handed Bryce her reservation details and ID. Bryce took them without a word, his eyes flicking briefly over the license before focusing on the screen. Heather stifled a laugh at something on her phone and whispered something to Bryce. The exchange was subtle, but not subtle enough to escape Maya's notice. "You're booked in first class?" Bryce said finally, as if it was a question that needed further confirmation. "Yes," Maya replied evenly. "That's correct." Bryce smirked faintly. "Huh. Well, okay then." He printed out a baggage tag, slapped it onto her suitcase without ceremony, and pointed across the hall. "Oversized drop is over there." Heather chuckled quietly as Maya picked up her bag and walked away. She didn't look back. Years of political life had hardened her against dismissive behavior, but there was something different about this. It wasn't just indifference. It was disdain. Escalation. After checking her luggage, Maya proceeded toward security. She had TSA pre-check, a small perk of her frequent travel for Senate business. As she moved through the expedited line, she spotted Bryce and Heather again, this time off-duty, slipping through a parallel security checkpoint. She overheard them talking, their words casual, careless, and cutting. "Did you see that old suitcase?" Heather snickered. "First class?" "Yeah, right. But she scammed an upgrade or something," Bryce added. "No way she's flying up front legit." Maya's stomach turned. She took a slow, steadying breath. She wasn't new to the sting of prejudice, but it still surprised her how brazen people could be. She collected her things from the scanner and reminded herself why she was flying in the first place. There were people in D.C. who needed her to stay focused, constituents who depended on her voice in those committee rooms. But as she made her way to her gate, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The gate. Gate 14 was crowded, as most gates were on a busy afternoon at O'Hare. Maya found an empty seat by the window, tucked away from the boarding lines. She sipped a coffee and reviewed her notes on small business relief initiatives, her mind half on the pages and half on the earlier encounter. Then she saw them again, Bryce and Heather. Somehow, they were assigned to staff the gate for her flight. She watched them from the corner of her eye as they laughed and whispered behind the podium. Bryce's gaze drifted toward her, and he nudged Heather, who rolled her eyes in return. When pre-boarding was announced, Maya stayed seated. She knew the drill. Families with small children, passengers with disabilities, active-duty military, all boarded first. Then came first class. "We are now boarding first-class passengers," Bryce announced without enthusiasm. Heather stood beside him, expression bored, her arms crossed. Maya rose and joined the short line. As she approached the podium, Bryce took her boarding pass and studied it longer than necessary. "Senator Reynolds," he read aloud, his tone neutral but edged. "First class." "Huh." Heather leaned in slightly. "Any ID to confirm that?" Maya's jaw clenched. "You already scanned my boarding pass." "Just a routine check," Bryce replied, shrugging. "Happens all the time." "No, it didn't." But Maya handed over her ID again. Bryce compared it to her boarding pass like a bouncer at a club. "You don't look like most of our usual first class," Heather murmured. Maya fixed her gaze on them both. "Is there a problem?" Bryce hesitated, then handed back her ID and boarding pass. "Enjoy your flight." The breaking point. Maya boarded and settled in a seat too, stowing her bag and taking out her notes again. The flight attendant, a kind man named Antonio, greeted her warmly and offered her a drink. She accepted water, grateful for the brief kindness. But then Bryce and Heather appeared at the front of the cabin, speaking in low tones to Antonio. He glanced back at Maya, his face registering confusion. He approached her, apologetic. "Senator Reynolds," he said quietly, "they're requesting to recheck your boarding pass." "I already showed it," Maya said firmly. "I know," Antonio replied, "but they're insisting." With controlled frustration, Maya pulled up her mobile boarding pass again. Antonio scanned it. "No issues." He turned back to them. "Everything checks out." But Heather wasn't convinced. "Maybe we need to check her ID again," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. And that's when Maya decided enough was enough. The reveal. Maya reached into her bag, not for her driver's license, but for the small leather wallet that held her government-issued Senate identification. She held it up, letting the seal glint in the cabin light. "You want proof?" she said calmly. "I am Senator Maya Reynolds, and I'd like an explanation for your behavior." The silence that followed was deafening. Bryce paled. Heather's mouth opened and closed with no sound. Antonio stepped forward quickly. "Senator, I am deeply sorry. I'll notify the captain." Aftermath. The captain, Rose Hernandez, met with Maya in the forward galley. She apologized sincerely, promising an investigation and formal action. Bryce and Heather were removed from duty upon landing, and a corporate representative awaited Maya at the jet bridge. Rachel Adams, the American Airlines customer relations manager, was professional and direct. She apologized, took Maya's formal complaint, and promised a thorough investigation. Within days, Maya received confirmation. Bryce and Heather were terminated following multiple confirmed violations of company policy. American Airlines also announced a mandatory diversity and inclusion training program for all customer-facing employees. The bigger picture. Maya addressed the media with measured grace. She acknowledged the incident, spoke on the realities of implicit bias, and reiterated her focus on policy reforms to support equity on a broader scale. "This isn't about me," she told reporters. "It's about ensuring every traveler is treated with dignity." In the weeks that followed, Maya returned to the Senate floor with renewed resolve. The incident at O'Hare was behind her, but its lesson endured. Power doesn't always announce itself. And sometimes, Those who underestimate quiet strength are in for the shock of their lives. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts on Senator Reynolds' stand against bias and how we can all strive for a more just and respectful world. Together we rise.